Bonjour à tous, good morning everyone. May I kindly ask you to have a seat so we can start on time. Thank you very much. Good morning, bonjour à tous, à ceux qui sont ici présents avec nous, and for the colleagues who are and the friends of education who are online and joining us online. My name is Jonathan Crix. I just recently joined UNICEF Belgium after spending some time in Jerusalem and in the Gaza Strip and in the West Bank. And I'm absolutely delighted to be your host today. It's an honor to welcome you all to the 16th annual Educate conference. It's a very important moment. Every year, this international gathering offers an opportunity to reflect on the role that education and development can play together in shaping our world. And this year's theme is probably the most actual and also the most frightening. It's education in times of turmoil. And we have all seen what is happening overall in the world these days. Educate, the organization which is organizing this event, is the Belgian platform for education and training in international cooperation. And this conference is organized with the support of its member organizations and the Belgian government. And on behalf of Educate, I would like to warmly thank all member organizations, partners, speakers, and participants joining us today. Across this conference, we're going to have amazing international experts, government representatives, NGOs, and specialists who will share their insights on how inclusive education, school protection, children protection, and support for the teachers and the learners increase the children's resilience and contribute to peace building globally. The morning programs cover several aspects, speeches and panel discussions with high-level speakers. And in the afternoon, we will separate in 4 groups, 4 learning labs, which will draw on global examples from Educate members and partners who will highlight practical strategies to keep education going amid crisis. As we open this 16th Educate conference, let us carry forward the conviction that education and stability are actually mutually reinforcing. On your seats and very soon behind me, you will see drawings, postcards. And those postcards are linked to an initiative that is very close to my heart, which is called the Gaza We Want. The Gaza We Want comes from a very simple analysis. While the world leaders have been discussing the future of Gaza, there is one big part of the Gaza population who had not been consulted, the children. And the children of Gaza, we're not talking about a small number. We're talking about 1 million people. We're talking about half of the population of the Gaza Strip who have never been consulted about what do they want for their future. And so in December 2025, UNICEF has led a survey. So it was a poll survey in the small tents that are used as classrooms in the Gaza Strip, but also in activities, creative activities where children could draw and do theater and express themselves about what do they want. And believe it or not, in a place which has been so incredibly, terribly impacted by the war, education was among the top priorities. And that is particularly important because we have to realize that education beyond is contributing to stability, but how? In the Gaza Strip, it is the only way for children to get a very scarce resource, hope. And hope is exactly what is needed for children in the Gaza Strip because, and actually everywhere in conflicts, because hope is what is contributing for children to be able to build a future for themselves. And that is contributing to stability. So later or here you can scan the QR code for our colleagues online. You can scan the QR code to learn more about this initiative, but I really wanted to share this with you. Now, before we kick off, just a few housekeeping information and very practical information before we move to the panel, to the keynote speeches. So in terms of translation, the today's session will be in English and in French. You have headsets for those who want to have translation, and online is a button you can activate on the platform that will grant you translation. And in terms of questions, I really insist, this is a participatory conference. We really, the questions are not only welcome, they are really important for us, and they will contribute to the exchange and to the outcome and the recommendations of this conference. And for those online, please feel free to ask your questions in the chat, and for the colleagues who are here, there will be a Q&A session which will be organized, of course, at the end of the different modules of this presentation. Another practical information, the Wi-Fi guest that you see here is not working. Sorry, the Wi-Fi QR code that is on the wall there is not working, and I encourage you, if you want to connect to the Wi-Fi, you can connect to Wi-Fi guest. You will have to give your email, and then you will receive credentials. Last practical aspect, this conference will be recorded, and the presentations and the videos will be available soon on www.educate.be. It is now time to start with our first speakers representing DG ECHO, the VVOB and Enabel. So, je vous propose de commencer avec Madame Evelyne Masseline.
Let us start with Evelyne Masseline,
who has an extensive experience with education globally. So, dear Evelyne, if you please join me.
Goedemorgen allemaal. Bonjour à toutes et tous. Marhaba bikoum. Good morning to everyone. We brought out the sun for you, but we are talking about a very serious topic this morning: education in times of turmoil. On behalf of Enable, but also the larger network of Educate, we want to wish you a very welcome, especially to the students who did the effort to come today while they are in their very important exam period. And I want to warmly welcome all of our speakers, our guests, our colleagues from education, from development, from humanitarian action, academia, policy, and civil society. And a very special welcome goes to the European Commissioner of Preparedness, Crisis Management and Equality, Madame Hadja Labib. Thank you very much for being with us. His Excellency, Deputy Minister of Education of Palestine, Dr. Asaf, thank you so much for making the effort to come. UN Special Rapporteur on the Right to Education, Farida Shahid. Director General of Development Cooperation and Humanitarian Affairs, who will join us a bit later, Dr. Heidi Rombouts. Director General of the Directorate of Vocational Education at the Ministry of Education and Science of Ukraine, Madame Shumik. She will be joining us online. UNICEF Global Advisor on Education in Emergency, Madame Mourseli. And Assistant Professor of Conflict Studies at the University of Amsterdam, Mevrouw Kuppens. Thank you so much for being here. 5 years ago, all speeches started with "the world is changing fast." Now, we can no longer say that it's not going fast, it has turned upside down. Where we used to have a clear separation between, and silos as well, between humanitarian aid, development aid, and then economic diplomacy and trade, as we were discussing this morning already, this is no longer the case. And this is uncomfortable, but it is a reality we have to deal with. Geopolitical uncertainty, increased displacement, fragility, and conflict are forcing us to fundamentally rethink, to innovate, and to adapt how we work in fragile and fast-changing contexts. And this is especially complicated when we talk about education. Education systems, I always think about it as a large machine, or maybe more appropriate in these times, a big tanker in the Strait of Hormuz. They are slow systems, complex systems to adapt, and the return on investment sometimes don't show immediately. They're long-term, and they're not always so visible. But the evidence is crystal clear. Education and skills development are among the most important foundations for sustainable development. And failure to invest in it risks reinforcing social unrest, insecurity, and slower economic growth. And while it takes decades to build up an educational system, it can be destroyed in seconds. Today's programs will reflect the urgency of this challenge. From the morning plenary, on why we will focus on why education must be protected and continued in support of stability, development, and peace. And in the afternoon learning labs on education, we will focus on fragility and armed conflicts, but also its links to mental health and psychosocial support, to inclusion and social cohesion. And throughout the day, we will hear how education is not only about the continuity of learning and building skills, but it's also about creating a protective and stabilizing force that helps preserve structure, resilience, and already starting reconstruction to create hope for the future. And for Enable, 5 years ago, we were not present in active conflicts. Now we are. It's no longer an abstract discussion. In Palestine, we see that the lines very clearly between emergency response and long-term development have become totally intertwined. Protecting the continuities of learning is part of protection, recovery, and development. And we notice that we have to constantly adapt our support flexibly, including creating, for example, temporary learning spaces in Gaza, looking for digital solutions as schools become less safe. And in this context, education and skills development remain a top priority for resilience and opportunity for all young people. And I take the example of Ukraine. There we help to create the conditions for a return to in-person learning, also by, for example, creating shelter infrastructure, and at the same time supporting the much needed vocational education as part of the broader recovery effort. We think about Palestine, we think about Ukraine, but we also can think about the Sahel, where young people, students, teachers have to live in very fragile and uncertain conditions, like in Niger and Burkina Faso. We also think about DRC, the Eastern DRC. And there we do the efforts to keep learning and skilling, linking this to gender equality, to stability, and to opportunity for a very fast growing population. And across all these contexts, including through our global citizen education program in Belgium, there is one fundament, and that is to invest in young people. And this is by strengthening critical thinking, promoting meaningful participation, and supporting them not only as beneficiaries. We don't like the word beneficiaries. We have to think of them as partners, innovators, and actors of resilience, recovery, and change. And this was also reflected in a very interesting yesterday's side event, Education in Crisis, Youth Speak Out, where young people exchanged on the challenges facing education, and some of the results will be shared during this conference. Very exciting to hear that. And what gives me hope is that this conference does not only ask what is going wrong, but we will also be looking what can be done together. The program brings together practical experience, policy reflections, youth perspectives, and partnerships across sectors. And that is exactly what we need. No isolated responses, but stronger collaboration across education, humanitarian, and development actors. So let me close by warmly thanking Educate and all its partners for the many years of constructive collaboration through annual conferences and working groups. And I hope this conference will be once again a space for honest exchange, practical learning, and especially renewed commitment. And not only to improving learning outcomes, but to build resilience, expanding opportunities, and laying the foundation for a more peaceful and stable future. I thank you all.
Thank you very much, Evelyn. Thank you very much for those insightful comments. We also have with us Tom van den Bos, who's the General Director of VVOB, Education for Development. Tom has supported education reform efforts in more than 20 countries in the past 2 decades. So Tom, if you would please join me on the podium.
Thank you very much, and good morning, everyone. Let me pick up from where Evelyn left us. This conference starts from a very important focus: education in crisis, education in emergencies, and rightly so, because when a crisis hits, education is often one of the first systems to be disrupted. As you said it so beautifully, it even gets disrupted in seconds, but it takes decades to build that up. It's one of the hardest to build and rebuild. So as we reflected on this conference, we felt there was something more we needed to bring into the conversation. Because if we only talk about education in emergencies, we risk asking the question too late. What if we also asked, what is the role of education in preventing crisis in the first place? Let me briefly take you to Mahama refugee camp in Rwanda, in the eastern province, close to the border with Tanzania, a refugee camp with a lot of Burundian refugees from Burundi, a very large camp with thousands of children. And we were there to understand how education was working in that context. And what I remember most was not only the challenges in the camp, it was also the determination. The children showing up, the teachers doing their best in very difficult circumstances. And there was a real effort to create some sense of normalcy. But at the same time, it was very clear, just access to education was not enough. Classrooms were overcrowded, resources were limited, and learning outcomes were very fragile. And you realize in a moment like that, if education is present, but not working well enough, it does not deliver on its promise. Not for those children, and not for the stability of the system around them. And that is why today's theme really matters. Not only education as a response, but education as a driver of stability, resilience, and peace. And that conversation is not abstract. It connects directly to our policy priorities, including here in Belgium and at European level, where stability is increasingly central. At Educate, the Belgian platform for education and development, this is not new. We have explored education and climate. We have explored education and health. And today we take the next step, education and stability. Because in a world of growing fragility, we need to better understand how education systems can help societies cope, adapt, and hold together. At VVOB, we work on strengthening education systems, often starting with foundational learning. But this is not just about whether children can read or write or do basic mathematics. Because when large numbers of children go through school without learning, it's not just a technical issue anymore. It's a signal. It's a signal of inequality, a signal of exclusion, a signal that the system is not working for everyone. And when those signals accumulate, they do not stay in classrooms. They shape entire societies. In many contexts, schools are the first place where children experience the state. If that experience in schools is an experience of exclusion or an experience of failure, it shapes the trust of these children and young people far beyond the classroom. And the scale is still worrying. In many countries, 7 in 10 children cannot read a simple story by the age of 10. And that's not just a learning crisis. That is a stability risk. And at its best, education systems build something very, very powerful. They build capabilities. The ability to think, the ability to solve problems, the ability to collaborate, to work together, and to manage uncertainty, the ability to participate in society, and the ability to build meaningful livelihoods. And when these capabilities are developed for everyone, education does much more than support these individuals. It strengthens societies. And there is strong evidence for that. Each additional year of schooling reduces the risk of recruitment into armed groups, not only because education increases income, but also because education strengthens civic trust and social cohesion. And for example, higher levels of secondary education are linked to fewer conflicts and more durable peace. In that sense, education is not just a sector. It is infrastructure for stability. And that requires a shift in how we think. Because when we talk about stability, we often think of physical infrastructure. We invest in roads, we invest in energy systems, we invest in security, and rightly so. But if the people using those roads, if the people connecting to those energy systems, if the people living under that security do not feel included, if they don't have opportunities, if they do not trust the system, then that infrastructure alone will not create stability. And education is different. Evelyn said it, it's slower, it's less visible, it's less immediate, but in many ways it is more fundamental because it shapes how people think, it shapes how people support themselves, and it shapes how they see their place in society. But none of this happens automatically. It depends on choices we make. Choices about who is included, choices about quality, choices about how systems respond to inequality, how systems respond to diversity. But if we get those choices right, education can reduce the risk of instability. And if we get them wrong, it can unintentionally contribute to instability. So if there is one message I would like to leave with you this morning, it is this. We need to move from seeing education only as a response to crisis to recognizing it as a central part of how we build stability and prevent crisis. And that means investing earlier, investing more consistently, and investing in systems that are inclusive, resilient, and built to last. And stability can be built in classrooms every day. So let me end with one simple thought. Without education, there is no growth. Without growth, there are no opportunities. And without opportunities, instability follows. So if we want more stable societies, if we want fewer crises in the future, education is not just part of the solution. It is actually the foundation. Thank you very much.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur Van den Bos, pour ces remarques fondamentales sur le lien entre l'éducation.
Thank you very much, Mr. Van den Bos, as regards these essential comments. I have now the pleasure to welcome Adjala Beper. She is the European Commissioner for Equality and Crisis Management. She reacted at several occasions to underline the importance of education in a crisis situation. Mrs. Labibe, please join me.
Merci, Jonathan.
Yes, thank you very much, Jonathan.
Dear Minister, ladies and gentlemen, mesdames et messieurs,
Dear friends, Evelyn Maskelin, Tom van den Bosch, I would like to thank Educate for organizing this conference because yesterday we presented our communication on humanitarian support and also how we adapt ourselves in this difficult world. Tom van den Bosch talked about a situation in Rwanda. I would like to talk about Beirut. This was my last mission abroad. I was in a big school in the capital, a school which was which was transformed into a shelter in order to house the people displaced by the situation, by the strikes in the south of the country. So people who have lost everything. And I do remember each time I go abroad, when I come home, I remember a face of a little boy full of energy and with bright eyes, and I almost could read in his eyes and the questions he wanted to raise. I thought, well, if he had a teacher, if he had real tools, I'm quite sure he would be a magnificent pupil. But he was in a school, he was in a classroom where there was no real education. Well, there was education, but for the oldest one and only based on distance. I'm sure you know who I'm talking about. You know, everyone knows a little boy 5, 6 years old. Well, multiply this by 127 millions. 127 millions. This is the number of children who can go to school but who can't because they live in a crisis situation. And now I will ask you to multiply this by 234 millions. This is the number of children who do not have access to a safe school. So basically, they cannot go to school on a regular basis because going to school, walking to school, driving to school is too dangerous because teachers are being killed because indeed schools are bombed. Girls or can't go to school anymore. They are obliged to work or even going to school. It's dangerous, and girls are pushed in forced marriage. We have more and more conflicts, and we know that now inequalities are growing. In emergency situation, you know, education, this is not what I shall call, this is not and I have this is not a luxury. And if we look at the different camps in Syria and elsewhere, the first questions families raised when the regime of Bashar al-Assad was toppled down: are we going to have schools again for our children? They were not asking for a house, they were not asking for safety, no, they were asking for schools. Because classes or classrooms or basically shelters. Children are protected against armed groups. They are protected against chaos. Therefore, we can talk about a shelter. And this has been shown in studies. You know, a girl going through secondary school has 60% less risks to be married when she's a child, and 60% less probability of dying. So, I mean, education leads to equality. And as you know, I'm also commissioner in the field of equality. And through education, we can put an end to this vicious circle of poverty. And in crisis, unfortunately, always the poorest, the most marginalized, the most deprived, they pay the hard price. It's not only using a school year, no, it's basically the seeds of the next crisis. It means that a generation will grow without competences, without being critical, without hope. And this is very dangerous for extremism. They are easy prey to be radicalized, to be abused. Schools are in favor of tolerance, of reconciliation, where children coming from different communities, but they learn to live with one another. Schools, you have understood it. These are not only places where you can learn. I'm also, you know, a commissioner for preparedness, and I saw it in Bangladesh. These are education places where crisis prevention take place. For instance, I saw evacuation exercises in case of a fire. How can we avoid, or how can we avoid problems? How can we warn neighbors? And these competences, they will remain, and they will be spread around in the family, in the neighborhoods, and also, you know, in Belgium and the European Union. I mean, children, they can learn very quickly, and they can disseminate good practices to their families. And this reality in Africa, in the Sahel region, in Central Africa, we have had decades of displaced people, of climate change, and millions of children haven't been able to go to school. And I mean, for girls, it's even worse. So we are talking about poverty, conflict, forced marriage, and young boys with no hopes. They become praise for armed groups, and well, nevertheless, we keep going. There is no money. Money is drying up in the field of education. Certainly, when we're talking about emergency situation, everything is drying up. And ladies and gentlemen,
that education is more than pencils and notebooks. It holds communities together. It gives young people a reason to stay and build their own future. Education in crisis is not charity, it is investment. We commit 10% of humanitarian aid to education. Each year, EU funding helps 2 million children access learning through safe schools, trained teachers, and solutions adapted to crisis like mobile classrooms or remote learning. And beyond humanitarian action, 13% of EU development funding goes to education, because building strong education systems before a crisis matters just as much as responding after. And just yesterday, we adopted our new EU strategy for humanitarian diplomacy and fragility. It is our political and financial commitment to safeguard the right to education for every child affected by conflict or humanitarian emergency. Yeah. Thank you. And I want to say a specific words also about teachers, because they are really the backbone of education in emergencies, and they are too often invisible in this debate. In fragile contexts, a teacher is often the only trusted adult in a child's life, like a life jacket in a storm, offering stability, offering protection. They teach under extraordinary pressure, sometimes as bombs fall around them. And yet they receive very little support very little recognition, and we ask teachers to hold communities together. The least we can do is hold them up in return. To support children in emergency, we should focus, in my opinion, on three very important areas. First, funding education as a first response and not as an afterthought. When crisis hits, schools should reopen within 3 months. That means prepositioning supplies, training teachers in trauma-informed education and equal access for girls from day one. And more funding strengthens innovation. In Ukraine, for example, digital learning has kept millions of children connected. Second, we need to protect schools, children's teachers. To save schools declaration must become universal. Attacks on education are war crimes. Those responsible must be held accountable. And third, we need to break down the silos. Education is not the job of ministers of education. Not only, I said, it is a cross-cutting priority for health, for protection, for climate action. Children also are not just students. We need to care them as a whole people, especially when they are at their most vulnerable, I think especially for the teenagers. To conclude, let me quote Nelson Mandela. He once said, je vais continuer en français parce que c'est en français dans mon texte.
And I'm going to read it in French because it's in French in my text. Education is the most powerful weapon to change the world. In humanitarian crisis, education is also our most important tool for hope for a child in a refugee camp. Education means a future for a young girl growing in a crisis situation. It means that our dreams are still valuable, and for a displaced family, it means that there is still somewhere a hope for a bright future. 127 million children expect or wants us to meet that challenge together. Let us meet that challenge, and these children, they count on us. Thank you very much indeed.
Merci Madame Labib, et merci également.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Labib. Thank you very much for having underlined the importance of something we sometimes do forget in our countries. Well, schools are places where children should be safe and should feel safe, and basically it's often not the case. We have a lot of young people with us today. We have young people we do not necessarily have their voice to be heard. With Educate, we wanted also to give the floor to the younger generation. I invite Laetitia Haddad to come up with her slam. Thank you very much.
Excellencies, dear colleagues, dear friends, my name is Laetitia Haddad, and I work for Be Global, Global Citizenship Education Program here at Enable. And I had the chance to organize for a few months a youth side event together with my colleague Pauline Bourtambourg from the Education Expertise Unit of Enable. Yesterday, we had here a side event. The title, Education in Times of Crisis. Youth Speaks Out. We gathered the voices of those most directly affected by education in times of crisis. Children, young people, those who fled conflict zones, who kept learning under bombs, who rebuilt their lives in a country that was not their own, but also youth from Belgium, from the diaspora, because the humanity within us knows no borders. What is happening in the world today shakes us all. And this youth side event was created so that these voices could be heard, to give a platform to the voiceless and to those who don't have the chance anymore to speak. I want to thank again Dr. Dr. Nafi Hassaf, Deputy Minister at the Palestinian Ministry of Education and Higher Education, for joining the conversation yesterday. Thank you so much. A huge thanks also to Catel Studio for this magnificent sketch note that you can see here behind me, which captured with talent and sensitivity the powerful messages of yesterday's session. Also, a huge thanks to Enable and Educate for giving us a seat at the table. So thank you so much. And now we hand over to art, to expression, to hope, to youth. Without further ado, over to the slammers. 1, 2, 3, slam!
Ni kukuwa na samani ya maji jangwani, kutunza maisha na vidonda vya ndani. Ni kukuwa na samani ya maji jangwani, kutunza maisha na vidonda vya ndani, bila shindano ila wino ya upendo. Ni kukuwa na samani ya maji jangwani, être artiste, kutunza maisha na vidonda vya ndani, être artiste, kutunza maisha na vidonda vya ndani, kutunza maisha na vidonda vya ndani, bila shindano ila wino ya upendo.
Les passagers à destination de Goma, veuillez attacher vos ceintures. Mesdames et messieurs, bienvenue à l'est de mon pays, la République démocratique du Congo, riche en énergie, en cobalt.
Welcome to Congo, to RDC. We are very rich because we have a lot of minerals, but we have no peace. Well, please keep education for your children because schools have been destroyed. Yes, for more than 1 year, Goma has fallen and we are at war. A war is waging. Maybe you will get no access to water, no access to electricity, because as I said, this is what we are living in. I heard that most dreams, they appear in small rooms, and every human being has a right to life and to education. When I was in Kinshasa, I heard that we became independent in 1960, and that was on the 30th of June because Patrice Lumumba fought for our freedom. But today, when I am in my little room, my dreams are nightmares because rapes are taking place every 30 minutes. Being educated, it's not for everyone, it's only for one person. How are we going to learn? Because indeed, we can't think anymore. Education, man, wife, wife, man, child, child, man, man, child, education.
Enfant, éducation. Enfant, éducation. Chers passagers,
Dear passengers,
bien que turbulation, promettez-moi une chose.
just make one promise when you will go home. A small, a little promise. Think about us. Think about us. Think about all the children who need us. Take action, because if you do not take action, it's even worse than those who attack us. Education is a right and not a privilege.
Merci.
Thank you very much.
I was 3 years old, and for the first time, I stood on my feet. And Mama shouted with joy, "She is ready for school." Ready, me at 3 years old. That day, and unknowingly, I had already started working towards my destiny. Before school, life was paradise. Eat, sleep, rest. Oh, sorry, I forgot. And of course, Olympic level crying at midnight. But school. School taught me there are tears heavier than a child's cries. The loneliness hidden inside crowded classrooms. The battle nobody sees. And somehow, between chalk, dust, and classroom noise, between punishment and poetry, between sit down, well done, good morning, madam. Slowly, I fell in love with this new world of my life. I understood school is not just a place, school is life, and maybe life itself is school. So I learned strength, not the strength of muscles, oh, the strength of carrying sadness. Yes, the strength of carrying sadness without dropping your future. I thought school was my shield, but an iron flesh broke through my shield. Now that my shield is gone, what comes next? Then I remembered school is hope. Yes, hope. Something irreplaceable, you guessed. I'm sure you guessed all. My brain, your brain, our brains. And here comes the birth of overcoming minds.
Il a compris que dans ce monde, beaucoup se perdent sur le trottoir. Un jeune est perdu,
A
mais il garde un
young
peu
guy
d'espoir car il pense que
is
sur lui,
lost, but
le
he
pouvoir c'est
has
lui.
no hope because hope,
Ce pas la
according to
troisième
him,
personne du
is
singulier,
power.
car c'est
It's
un
a
homme au
young
féminin.
boy.
Il
His
est à
name
Goma,
is
il a
Junior.
perdu son père et sa
War
mère.
in
Il est
Goma.
vivant dans les
He
rues de
lost
Goma.
his
Il ne sait
father
plus où aller.
and
Il a
his
peur, il a
mother,
peur.
and he doesn't know where to go
À
because
l'est,
he lost
on a
everything.
vu
In
des horreurs.
eastern Congo, he saw a lot
Injustice que
of
beaucoup racontent.
horror.
Les orphelins
What I
vivent dans la
do
peur.
tell, this is what orphans
Junior,
go
fort
through.
et courageux.
Junior
Tu
is
sais, Junior a
brave,
brisé
you
beaucoup
know,
d'empires.
Junior. He had a lot of ambitions,
Mais
a
ses
lot of
ambitions avaient fini
desires,
quand
but his hopes
par la mort
disappeared
un jour.
when his parents were killed.
Et il espère encore
He still
que la
hope,
voix
he
ne
still
l'abandonne
hope, but there is a voice in
pas.
his head saying hope is power. Thank you. I'm sorry, but translating slam is very difficult. I heard that, you know, slamming is not only making rhymes, it's bringing together ideas and words. It's to be passionate, and it's also to carry the rage of all those children. For instance, in Ukrainian women, a child in Goma. I talk in the name of those who do not have access to education, those whose dreams disappeared because of bombings, dreams who disappeared because of gunshots, children who couldn't have a pencil in their hands but got a gun in their hand. These people who crushed education. Education makes us seeing the world differently, to see it in another way, and it brings us also a brighter future, a bigger future.
There is no opportunity. Without opportunity, there is no growth. Thank you.
Parce que la crise fragmente. Elle fragmente les pays, elle fragmente les familles, elle fragmente les repères,
Crisis is
les croyances.
tearing us apart, families, beliefs, everything. But especially crises are very difficult for young people, leaves parts of our childhood that we will never live again. But amongst all these things, we have schools. We have a classroom. People laughing, smiling, playing, and a voice which explains. And then Edika, hope, hope, hope. A reason for us to continue. A space where we can rebuild, reconstruct. Thank you.
Merci. Merci
Thank
beaucoup,
you. Thank you very much.
Pardon.
Oh, sorry.
Sorry. Thank you for this opportunity. My name is Aoi. I grew up in Japan. For me, it was really normal to go to school, study, play with children. I entered university and then I worked as a teaching assistant. And I found I really liked this job because every student and children find their dreams and goals through learning processes. However, this environment is not normal for everyone. I met Maze. She's from Palestine. I met her yesterday's event, Education in Crisis. And her voice moved my heart. She said, despite everything is dead around her, like buildings, plants, also people, how can we live? To find the answer of this question, she continues running education. Also, she said she is not a special survivor, she is a part of the world. Now I'm here to share their voices, all of you. I want to be a bridge. I want to deliver her voices or their voices to the world. We are part of the world. Thank you.
I don't dare taking the floor anymore. I'm just looking at each and every one of you in the eyes. All right, so thanks. Thanks a lot. Merci beaucoup, Pauline Bourtambour, Laetitia Haddad, Carmel, Ingrid, Cédric, Daniel, Plessing, Bart. Merci, merci, merci.
Thank you all. Thank you very much. Thank you for having underlined how much education is important in times of crisis, of trouble. Thank you also for having shown how much education is related to hope. And hope is the thing which has to motivate us and bring us together. Now going to move to the keynote speeches of Lien Kuppens first.
Conflict Studies at the Governance and Inclusive Development Program Group of the University of Amsterdam. Mrs. Kuppens, the floor is yours.
All right, good morning. Thank you very much. I totally feel you, Jonathan. I also feel quite modest right now after all of those wonderful slammers, really. And I was also expecting that by now the energy would be kind of low. So I was gonna, use a tiny little bit of an energizer, but I mean, you energize the space anyhow. But if you don't mind, I will anyways ask you to move a little bit and to, you are energized, but also stretch your legs a bit. So in a minute, you can already get up if you want. I will read out a statement, and I would like to know whether you agree or disagree. So if you agree, please sit down. If you disagree, please remain standing. Understood? Yeah? Great. So, education is quite simply peace building by another name. It is the most effective form of defense spending there is. So if you agree, you sit down. If you disagree, you keep on standing. Great. So if you disagree, feel free. Like yes, there's not enough space. There's not enough space for nuance. I agree. And so if I was teaching at university, I would allow you to now take the floor and share why you feel that you cannot choose one or the other. But, you know, we are short in time, so I'm just going to continue. I hope you forgive me. But I already literally wrote down, I'm happy that most of us, I put a question mark nevertheless, are on the same page, but so I'm happy this actually happened. As my take-home message is that education is not only a human right, it is not only stability amidst uncertainty, it is also not only an investment in students' future and in a country's socio-economic development, but, to paraphrase, it is also the most effective form of peace building there is. That is, at least, if we invest in it as such. And so my objective today is to send you home acknowledging the power of education to shape more peaceful generations, not only in crisis and conflict-affected societies, but also in your home countries, here in Belgium and beyond. My message is not new. After all, this line is often attributed to Kofi Annan, former Secretary General of the United Nations, who before taking up this role was the Under-Secretary General for Peacekeeping. So I guess if he said these words, then it must be true. Yet, while it is arguably one of the strongest tools for stability and peace, it is under pressure from conflict and crisis, as we have already heard this morning. And this map, which comes from the Global Coalition to Protect Education from Attack, shows how across the world education is indeed targeted. And for those of you who are not familiar with the coalition, they document attacks on schools, on higher education, attacks on students and staff, and they separate it out also for targeted attacks on girls and women. But they also look at sexual violence, child recruitment, and military use of buildings. The data is always running a bit behind, so this map is also from 2024. As an academic, I have to be precise about those things. And they use then even data from the years before that. But I think in a few weeks, the new report is coming out, so I do recommend you to check it out. But in 2022 and 2023 alone, the Global Coalition documented 1,070 attacks on education and military use of schools in Gaza and Palestine more broadly. In the same year, there were also 508 attacks in the Democratic Republic of Congo, 490 attacks in Myanmar, and 773 students and educators harmed in Pakistan. And this is just a few of the numbers. The new report, as I said, is underway, and unfortunately, it does not promise to be more rosy. In all these cases, these attacks, but also the threat of these attacks, and I think that is also really crucial to mention, affect learning. If it is not a complete disruption of schooling, it affects the quality of learning. How would you be able to focus? This is partially why a relatively outdated World Bank report called conflict development in reverse. And studies have estimated the learning losses across the world. For example, the civil war in Côte d'Ivoire set back the schooling of youth in the north of the country back by 1 year compared to those of the south. And the war in Tigray, for example, costed a third year of schooling, according to the UN. However, it's also crucial to emphasize that these attacks are deliberate, with few exceptions. Teachers are targeted because of their identities and as representatives of the state. Schools are targeted because of whom they teach and what they teach. And is there anybody who happens to recognize what is on the blackboard? Yes, exactly. It's from ISIS. And this brings me to another side of education that we also need to acknowledge if we are to explore its peace-building potential. In 2000, a seminal study by UNICEF coined the idea of the two phases of education. Whereas most typically, we focus on the positive side of education. So we have discussed the socioeconomic opportunities that it provides, but also the democratic dividends that it can foster. But education can also divide. It can promote exclusive identities and militarism. It can foster political indoctrination, whether overtly or less blatantly. Both what is taught matters, as well as how it is taught. Maria Montessori, the Italian educator, for instance, thought that the success of fascism had to be understood, at least to some extent, in terms of the authoritarian and hierarchical nature of schooling. The two phases of education are now broadly acknowledged in both policy and academia, and even expanded to the multiple phases of education to indicate that it's not always black and white. Often, education is also a double-edged sword. Think, for instance, of language of instruction. It can be used to promote unity, as is the case of Kiswahili, for instance, in Tanzania, but it can also impose identity, as was the case with the use of Spanish in Guatemala formerly. And also the devolution of education can promote peace through power sharing, which is actually also the case here in Belgium, but it can also harden identities, as is the case in Bosnia. Over time, frameworks have been developed to examine the conflict-promoting and mitigating roles that education can play, such as the 4R framework, as you can see here. It distinguishes between four spheres. First, looking at the sphere of redistribution, it looks at the equal opportunities for all groups in terms of access to quality education. It also assumes, therefore, that money needs to be redistributed equitably across regions, across types of schools. And thus it assumes that the chances or the likelihood for you to succeed at school should not be determined by the group that you are part of. In the second sphere of recognition, it's all about how schools or how education recognizes the groups that are part of a society. As I mentioned before, there's the issue of language of instruction, but there's also the content of curricula. So which groups are represented in what ways in the curricula that we study. Third is the sphere of representation, which groups are given a voice at the different levels of education governance. And you can think here from the school level onwards up until the national levels. And the final sphere of reconciliation is about what we learn at school about the causes of conflict, but also about the mindsets that were developed in order to enable conflict to take place. So the enemy images that people have developed about each other. Education provides an appropriate platform to change these, what I call conflict narratives. First of all, because it has a wide reach. In principle, we all go to school, and because it provides a pedagogical setting to discuss these sensitive issues. And then the idea, according to this sphere, is that by learning about the violent past, students can learn from it, making education an instrument of transitional justice. This brings me to peace education, which is directly related to the 4R framework. I distinguish in my work between direct and indirect peace education. Indirect peace education refers to the types of education that aim to promote peace, but by not addressing directly the conflict dynamics that took place in a particular country. In practice, very often, this results in choices for instance, multicultural education, human rights education, and civic or citizenship education. However, especially in settings of conflict, it is also important to address the causes of conflict itself and those images as I referred to before. And so this is what but before me, other people call direct peace education. But of course, direct peace education is much more challenging, an issue that I will get back to. Now, what does usually happen after conflict? And in this sense, it is interesting to look at peace agreements. So to what extent is education actually considered after conflict? Breaking it down using the 4R framework, I'm just sharing a few examples. In Burundi, for instance, there's an example of redistribution. The Arusha Peace and Reconciliation Agreement recommended education redistribution towards marginalized groups. In terms of representation, the Guatemalan peace agreement called for the involvement of representatives from indigenous communities in the management of education, while the Filipino peace agreement proposed to grant regional autonomy. The Guatemalan peace agreement also stands out in terms of recognition, once again giving the example of the language of instruction. With respect to the sphere of reconciliation, peace agreements tend not to make too much mention of the introduction of direct or indirect peace education, but truth and reconciliation commissions and reports increasingly do, which is a promising trend. Now, let's not only look at the political level, but also at the level of teachers, because teachers are indeed crucial, as Laja Habib so well put before. And teachers are also the group that I have worked with most. So looking at my work in Côte d'Ivoire, Kenya, and the Kivu provinces that I conducted with colleagues, I want to show 3 insights from working with secondary school teachers in these settings. First, the large majority of teachers in Côte d'Ivoire, Kenya and the Kivu provinces strongly believe in the peace-building role of education. Nearly all teachers think education can and should promote peace by bringing together students from different groups, but also by teaching about notions of peace and social cohesion. But a majority also supports teaching about their country's violent past. So both for direct and indirect peace education, there is support. There are nonetheless restraints. Many teachers, and in the case of Congo, students have been impacted by the conflict. And here I point out Congo because of the time in the other 2 settings between the actual conflict and the research I did. And having been impacted by the conflict, of course, talking about it can reopen wounds. And so dealing with the trauma is a challenge. They also fear hot moments in the classroom and polarized debates. And importantly, outside of the classroom, they are afraid of negative reactions from parents and, once again, in the case of Congo in particular, from conflict actors. This was already so before the re-emergence of M23, but has become worse since. Third, we have to acknowledge that teachers are just like anybody else, part of society, and they have been exposed or raised in an environment of conflict. They themselves may have stereotypes, as was the case in Kenya, or biased interpretations of what has actually happened in the past, as was the case in Côte d'Ivoire. They have also not necessarily been prepared to deal with student trauma or moderate heated discussions, or to more generally use student-centered participatory approaches, as is the case in Congo. But such pedagogies are nonetheless crucial to peace education. To sum up, what have I learned from my own research and other research is sobering but hopeful at the same time. The increasing number of attacks and dwindling budgets are sobering. The huge learning losses are sobering. The sheer size of the challenges to rebuild are sobering. But the resilience of education itself in many forms is hopeful, and oftentimes led by those strongholders of education, teachers. And their beliefs in the peace-building role of education, including in these contexts of adversity, I think is incredibly hopeful. And hence, to conclude, I would like to make a plea for more true defense spending, and that is spending on education, with a particular focus on teacher training and support for teachers, whether in or pre-service. Teachers are peace builders, perhaps imperfect, but we should support them in that role.
Dank u wel, Lynn, and thank you very much for emphasizing the immense role of teachers in crisis. Thank you. It is now time to take a little break, 10 minutes. I just wanted to flag that our colleague Farida Shahid, who's the special rapporteur on the right of education for the UN, has sent us a video contribution that will be available online during the lunch break a little bit later today, and it will be also possible to view it here. So take those 10 minutes. We reconvene at 11, have some refreshment, and move your legs. We have still very interesting conversations ahead of us. Thank you very much. See you in 10 minutes. And to join us for this panel, thank you very much and welcome back. I hope you had the time to move a little bit, and we are now coming back to this panel, which is, I believe, a very important one about education in times of turmoil. We are very pleased to be joined today by an outstanding panel bringing together government, multilateral, academic and country perspectives. I would like to warmly welcome Your Excellency, Dr. Nafia Assaf, Deputy Minister of Education and Higher Education of Palestine. Mevrouw Heidi Hombouts, the Director for Development Cooperation and Humanitarian Affairs at the Belgian Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Ms. Iriana Shumik, Director General of the Directorate of Vocational Education at the Ministry of Education and Science of Ukraine, who is joining us online today. Mrs. Elena Merselli, Global Education Advisor in Education in Emergencies at UNICEF. And Mrs. Lynn Kuppens, Assistant Professor of Conflict Studies at the University of Amsterdam. Thank you very much for joining us today. So what are we going to discuss now? The objective is to discuss and to focus on the role that education can play in supporting stability, long-term development and peace in times of crisis and turmoil. We will organize the discussion in 4 parts, 4 big themes, with stability being le fil rouge and running throughout the different aspects. First, we're going to discuss about education and crisis. Second, education and long-term development, which are not necessarily to be opposed, on the contrary. Third, education and peace building. And fourth, education at the humanitarian development peace nexus. And after that, we will open the floor for questions online and, of course, here in the audience before closing with a final round of reflections. And to begin with, I would like our panelists to summarize and that's always an awfully difficult exercise, so I am sorry for asking this, but I would like you to summarize in 1 or 2 sentences why this conference matters and why it is important to keep education on the top of the global agenda. And I will start with you, Dr. Nafia Assaf, if you have a couple of sentences for us.
Thank you, and good morning, everyone. Thank you, Jonathan, and my colleagues at the podium. I'm sorry, I'm the minority, so I have to start with Jonathan decided to start with myself. What is important about education? For Palestine, education is the one or number 1 priority. It is because of all the terminologies that you have heard in this morning opening. It's about resilience, resistance, stability, peacemaking, all of that, economic development, being competitive in this economic environment in the region and globally. For Palestine, education is a matter of life and being in this land, facing the genocide that we have, not only on the human, but also in the education. With the shift of the international, and unfortunately, international community governments shifting from education to other sectors, it is very important to raise the awareness and to deliver a message to those governments that education is not only a matter of luxury. No, it is an investment, it is a stability, and it is the investment, the peacemaking of humanity, not only for Palestine, but also a Palestinian, an educated Palestinian is a peacemaker with those in Belgium and in the different countries. But the non-educated people are very dangerous, not only for their society, but also for other societies. So it's very important to deliver the message to the governments that education is important as food, water, and health.
Thank you very much, Doctor. Ms. Heidi Rambouts, if you can tell us why this conference matters.
It's always very difficult, I believe, these days to speak after someone who comes from Palestine, where these topics are so much on the toppest or highest list of the agenda. And I just want to start, if you allow me so, by underscoring and acknowledging, indeed, the importance of education in Palestine. And I had the opportunity to witness it myself on the 4th of October in Gaza, where I visited the UNRWA schools and where I have had never in my life seen before such an motivated children, so much driven by education, and so much already at a very young age building their future on what they were learning in the schools and building their dreams. And I still think a lot about these testimonies that they shared with me that day. For us, Belgium, education remains, of course, important, and I believe we have for a long time been a strong supporter as well in environments which are very difficult. In international development cooperation and in our humanitarian approach, working in fragile settings is one of the topics that we've been, I think, acknowledged for as well, together with all the partners, and I see many of them here in the room, and I want to acknowledge them as well in that work. Belgium is, for example, a strong supporter of the Safe Schools Declaration. And it's important that it is not just a declaration, because I think sometimes in working environments, we do sign statements and declaration, and I think we really need to underpin them also with our diplomacy. And so Belgium indeed is still a strong supporter of international humanitarian law, international law. We do not accept that schools are being bombed, and which is the reality. And so I think this conference is important because it's not only about education, it's about a wider environment that is attacking not only education, but is basically attacking our humanity. And so for us, our support to UNICEF, for example, to UNRWA, as a very important actor also in terms of education in very difficult environments, but also Global Partnership for Education, working in environments also such as Ukraine, where education remains high on the agenda.
Thank you very much, Madame Rambouts. Our next panel forward a question in a few sentences. Irina, why is this conference important, and why is it important to keep education on top of the agenda, according to you, in Ukraine?
Of course, we understood that education is never only a national issue. So education should be a global agenda because, first of all, from our perspective, from the experience of Ukraine, that's more about how we can think critically, how we can protect democracy. We can organize our experience of this last 4 years and a half, can organize digital learning, online trainings. But unfortunately, our experience also shows that it's not possible to cover everything with online. And there are a lot of different competences. For example, even to have a normal social life, which is so important. And educational institutions, they are becoming the one and only safe space for young people and also for adults where we can receive these services. So, of course, we understand that education is also a sign of continuing normal life in Ukraine, and we continue our educational process only after 2 weeks after the large-scale aggression has been started, and now having different studies, we understand that providing only digital education is not a case. So it's not possible to fully replace school education, and children, they need to have direct contact with teachers. They need to have communication with their classmates, and they need to have this routine. At least in this way they also can feel that they are in safe place. So that's why I think that's very important to exchange of our experiences and to show how education can strengthen us in such conditions.
Thank you very much, Irina Shumik. I would like now to ask Elena Murselli if you can tell us about why this conference is important and education should remain a priority.
Yeah, thanks so much for this question. And let me start by saying how grateful I am to be here and represent UNICEF today in this event. And I would like to thank Enabel, UNICEF, NatCom here in Belgium, and all partners, and also to all the panelists. So yeah, it's specifically important because we are facing a convergence of three major situations. On one side, we have growing financing constraints, we have increasing crises and violations against children, but also rising expectation for education in emergency and the community working in education in emergency to demonstrate its relevance within the wider humanitarian reset. So this is a bit of a paradox. We have these three situations, and today the conference in Brussels matters because it brings education in times of conflict and turmoil at the forefront of global policy discussions, ensuring it remains a priority investment for stability, resilience, and prosperity, and not being sidelined in crisis response. So I think it just comes on time.
Thanks a lot, Elena. Mevrouw Line Kuppens, I would like to ask you the same question. So why is this topic and conference so important?
I'll keep it short since, well, you heard me before. And I'll use it as an opportunity to basically repeat what I said, because also that repeating a message always helps to get it across. So I think it's really important that we consider investments in education as the true defense spending, as I said. And I think this is very timely as we see all these calls and actual increases in the traditional defense spending at the expense of education, amongst others. And so we need to reverse this trend.
Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot, Lynn. So let's start with the first theme, why protect and continue education during crisis. At the start of this decade, COVID challenged education systems across the world, and Irina talked about the online form of education. Today we are also facing geopolitical shifts, huge ones, the consequence of climate change and a troubling number of emergencies and protracted crises. In the first round here in this team, we will explore why it is so important to protect and continue education. I have a first question for Elena and Lynn. In emergencies, the first response often focuses on life-saving needs, water, food, and shelter. Elena, why is it so important to include education in emergency response? And what is at stake for the children?
Thanks, Jonathan. That's a very very important and relevant question. So first, let me start maybe by reminding us of the scale of emergencies and how it affects children by sharing some data. We've heard that from Hajal Labib, but just to remind. So the scale is both global and growing. So today, 234 million crisis-affected children require urgent access to education. So 20% of all children in the world are living or fleeing conflict zones. And 127 million out-of-school children live in crisis-affected countries, representing nearly half of the global total of out-of-school children. Only 17% of crisis-affected primary school-age children achieve minimum reading proficiency. Schools are targets, we heard it. Attacks surged 44% in 2024, killing, injuring, or abducting more than 10,000 learners and teachers. Nearly half of the world's 31 million refugees are children, and almost half of out-of-school age refugee children are out of school. A lot of data, just to say that these are the challenges that we are facing in terms of access, quality, safety, and continuity of learning in crisis affected by countries. But in crisis context, schools are often the most stable and trusted public institutions. They provide not only learning, but also protection, psychosocial support, access to essential services, but also hope for a better future. And this is crucial for children, as it can provide them with opportunities to thrive and grow. In that sense, education is both humanitarian response and system building at the same time. So education is not an optional service in emergencies. It's not something that we do when we have time or when we have funding. Education in emergencies is both life-saving and life-changing and must remain a core priority in humanitarian action. Education has also a powerful effect, multiplier effect. School serves as essential platforms for protection, wash, nutrition, health, and other critical services. But above all, crisis-affected children and their caregivers consistently tell us that education is a top priority. We've heard that in Gaza, for example, a lot. So for Europe and its partners, and at global level too, this is not only a humanitarian issue, but it's a development, security, and migration issue. So rather than debating if we should invest in education in emergency or if education is life-saving or not, the question is, what are the risks of not investing in education? And why the risk? Because the risks are profound and often irreversible. So when learning is disrupted, children face significant learning loss that can quickly become permanent, especially where foundational skills are not built. At the same time, being out of school increases exposure, as we were reminded this morning, to a wide range of protection risks, including child labor, exploitation, and recruitment in armed groups, while also reducing chances for children of successfully transitioning into livelihoods later in life. For adolescents and youth, these disruptions break critical pathways from education skills and employment, trapping many in cycles of dependency and long-term exclusion. For girls in particular, the risks are even more acute. When schools close or access is interrupted, girls are more likely to drop out permanently, face early marriage, early pregnancies, and take on increased unpaid care and domestic responsibilities. In many contexts, returning to school becomes far more difficult once these disruptions occur, leading to lifelong consequences in terms of education, health, and economic empowerment. So the loss of safe learning spaces also removes an important layer of protection for girls, increasing their vulnerability to gender-based violence and exploitation. At community level, there are also risks of not investing in education. The stakes are equally high. Education systems anchor social cohesion, resilience, and a sense of normalcy. So when they collapse, inequalities deepen, recovery slows, and prospect for peace also and stability diminish. At national level, the consequences are even far more reaching. Disruptions to education weaken human capital formation, reducing productivity, limiting innovation, and constraining long-term economic growth. So entire cohorts of children and generation are lost, and youth risk entering adulthood without the skills needed to participate in the labor market. So increasing unemployment and dependency on social support systems when they are available, which is not the case in most countries we are talking about. So this in turn places additional strains on already fragile public finances. So in this sense, investing in the continuity of education during crisis is not only about protecting learning, it's critical investment in economic resilience, social stability, and the future development trajectories of entire countries.
Thanks a lot, Elena. And thank you. I think it's very important also indeed to highlight the cost of inaction. We can also discuss maybe later the cost of action, but it's very important to identify what it represents for children. Now, Lynn, from your research into education and conflict, do you find any specific arguments of why it is so important to maintain access to education during crisis and conflict?
So if you allow me, I will not build on my own research only, and use actually 4 categories or 4 arguments that are put forward in the literature. And so I will also be repeating some of the elements that have already been mentioned by Helena, but also by previous interventions. And so the first argument is because of the protective role of education. So I think Irina already explained it very well, that in times of conflict, school is at least still being able to go to school amidst all of these changes still provides some sense of normalcy and provides some sense of structure to students' lives, and I would argue also to teachers' lives. I think also within this protective argument, we can also give the examples that Helena referred to, that when children go to school, they also have these, or by going to school, there are indeed, research also shows that they are less exposed to gender-based violence, but also WASH initiatives or mine risk education, where it has been relevant, provide protective measures for children in times of conflict. The second view, or the second argument, would be the security argument. Personally, it's not my favorite argument, but it's based on the idea that indeed that those who are more likely to join armed groups are those who indeed have dropped out of school, and so by continuing to attend school, you also reduce the risk of these young people joining armed groups. Well, I was going to make a reflection on my reason why I said that it's my least favorite, but we can go into that if we have time later on. The third one is the economic argument. I think that one has also been largely covered already. So basically simply having those learning losses, even if schools have only been closed for a short period, it does affect. And during the keynote, I shared some research from Côte d'Ivoire, from Tigray. I think Tom also referred to a broader study. And I think still that these studies are still very conservative, right? I think they can never capture the true learning losses that are ongoing. And then the fourth argument would be the social-political argument, which aligns more, I think, also with the view of peace education, so the role that education can provide in terms of peace building. Sorry. And here I'd like to give one example of Bukavu. So on one of the slides I showed, there was also a quote that I didn't really pay attention to, but for those who noticed, it was a quote from a teacher from Bukavu, who said that even now in April, he still believed that it was really crucial to continue exploit is also not the right words, but for lack of a better word right now, the role of education in building peace. And this teacher had participated in a project that I did together with Justin Fundico 2 years ago, or 3 years ago by now. So just prior to the re-emergence of M23 in Bukavu, where we trained teachers on teaching about the violent past. And so we had spoken with this teacher a lot. And so now with the re-emergence, we spoke again to these teachers that took part in our training. And so he said, and with him other teachers that participated, that simply the fact that students from different groups, and in this case students that are considered autochthonous within Eastern Congo and those who are not, that they are still attending school together, that in itself is really crucial. And I think that is really a good example of the socio-political argument.
Thanks a lot, Lynn. I think this is extremely interesting. Dr. Assaf, I have a question on Palestine for you. What has helped the most to continue education despite the different crises and turmoil in the West Bank and Gaza? What are the key elements that have allowed, to a certain extent, education to continue forward?
As I mentioned, education for Palestine is one of the top priorities for many reasons. I will just list a little, some of them. First and above all, having hope. When you face, any human face difficulty, turmoil, if he or she has a hope, then they succeed to go through those difficulties. Palestine being under occupation for more than 75 years, the national identity were threatened. There's no Palestinians. Long time ago, there were many used the terminology that there's no national Palestinians. So to protect your national identity through education was the main source of protecting our national identity. Also, having a hope make it more easier for the society to be cohesion and to build the national economy without having support from anyone. I mean, the occupation doesn't support us. In fact, they control our resources. So we have only the human, the Palestinian human. If you ask anyone in the region, anyone of you travel to the Gulf countries, ask about the teachers. Which teacher would you like to have from the region? They will tell you immediately the Palestinian teacher. Compare them to the Syrians, to the Egyptians, to the Lebanese. They will say the Palestinian teacher, the doctors, the engineers. So it's a source of sustaining the community, the Palestinian society in Palestine. We send our children, we educate them quite good, and we send them overseas to work and to sustain the society economically. Also, it is very important that the message of protection. And I will share with you the hope and the message of protection, what I have shared with the youth yesterday. I have the privilege to be the youngest among the youth yesterday, the students, and I shared with them what have happened with me personally. From a woman that I never know, I never met. She's from Gaza. And she called after midnight. I don't want to make it long. I answered, and she did not say anything like, good evening, hello, salam, nothing. She just started hitting on me. What are you going to do with our children? They are in the streets looking for food, looking for water, but this is destroying their future. It's your duty to protect them by bringing back education. And I was like, I'm trying to protect myself now. So my first response is that you are talking about education, but you know, we don't have food for you. We don't have water. And she said, listen, my son. It's very encouraging. We can live without food for a few days. It's normal for human body to take it. I mean, human can live without food for 2, 3, 4, 5 days, even more. But the day that our children lose in education, you cannot replace it. So do something better than just waiting for the food to arrive. We will manage, but education is your responsibility to bring it back. The following day, we met with UNICEF head Jen. She was in Palestine, she left. And we decided we're going for education, for hope, for protection. The children in Palestine, in Gaza in particular, used to be used, not in a negative way, but it's in a positive way, that go and look for water. Now, whoever leave the school for a certain period of time, mostly he or she will never come back. And the consequences of that on the society will be really immense. On early marriages, pregnancy, but also using those children in different ways. So for Palestinians to protect the identity, to protect the children, to sustain the people and the society in Palestine, and most importantly, to you know, keeping all the time I keep saying the hope. It's really, this is the main driver of the Palestinian for the education. And I will end with this. A teacher, and I applaud our teachers. The Palestinian teacher have not received the salaries for the last 5 years, because Israel is withholding the tax money of the Palestinian Authority. But the teacher continue going for one reason. When you talk to them, I talk to them quite often, they say those are our children, and we receive the same from our previous teachers. Despite the difficulties, we will continue giving them the hope to maintain being here in Palestine and to maintain this country running until we have our independent state. So all of that, all of those reasons contribute to the education system to be running until now.
Thank you very much, Dr. Assaf. Very good concrete examples on how education can, continue despite conflict and crisis, but we also know how difficult it is. My next question is for you, Irina. You talked about online learning and the challenges that it represents, but why and how have you promoted the return to in-person education whenever possible in Ukraine? What are the challenges that you are facing, and what are you putting in place to bring children whenever possible on the school benches?
Oh yeah, that's not an easy question actually, because we thought that having this COVID experience in Ukraine and with the beginning of large-scale aggression, at least we have different opportunities to continue educational process. And of course, a lot of have been done, but in general, we understood that that should be, and the online training and online study is not the case if we want to have and to achieve those learning outcomes which is prescribed in our standards. So we have more than 1 million students which still are using the All Ukrainian School online platform, where we have developed according to our curriculum for secondary education, for general secondary education, for each subject, each lesson with a good quality. And it's also connected with the situation where we have a huge country, as we are, Ukraine, and the security situation in each region is different, because, for example, some regions in the western part of Ukraine, they have much less air raid than, for example, in my native region in Dnipro, which is on front line. And of course, the mode of providing of educational services is different in each region. We received great support from our international partners, and we are very grateful for each country and each international organization which support us with the establishment of digital learning centers, with the renovating of our shelters, or even with building new one shelters, with building actually schools in Kharkiv or in Zaporizhia, underground schools. It's absolutely strange, but at the same time fascinating thing, how we can organize face-to-face learning. And the major reason because of that, because of we decided not to go through only online study and online training. That was also some results which we received about learning versus which we have. So for example, um, our PISA results of 2022, they showed that we have much lower performance in Ukraine compared with the previous cycles. And even if we will talk about, I don't know, pandemic influence, but the bigger part is, of course, the full-scale invasion. So that's why at this moment the policies in this field in the country, in the state, is first of all to guarantee that especially in frontline region we can assure and we can build and renovate our shelters, which will allow it, and we can use this with a sort of double reasons, as a shelter and also as a space for educational process. So that's why we have so many investments as from state budget and also from international partners on the construction and also renovating of our shelters. The second one is, of course, energy sector and energy efficiency. Perhaps you know that last winter was the worst, I think, that we had in Ukraine. It was also taken into account weather conditions, but also the enormous numbers of attacks from Russian Federation. So it was several times like total blackout through all of the country. But these frontline regions and some central regions, of course, we have much more blackouts than, for example, in the other parts of country. And we change our policy in this field because we understand that educational institutions, they should to work in normal mode, and they shouldn't depend on the electric supply from the general lines. So that's why now we have another projects which actually aimed to support and to strengthen our education institutions with energy independence. So that's an installation of solar panels or specific equipment for this. And of course, we should be flexible with the rescheduling. So it's not easy, but we are using a lot of different instruments for communications with our students to have this connection, and also to be much more flexible in the organizing. So thanks to the support for UNICEF especially, so we have another program for the covering of educational losses. And we think that's also these additional lessons and workshops, they allow to our students and to our pupils receive as normal education, and so also psychological support from teachers, from their classmates. So it's a sort of way to have normal life. So yes, at this time we have more than 120,000 students, children, which supported with such activities in Ukraine, and we hope that return to the in-person learning also connected with our tries to gain on economic recovery, because with real skills which will be obtained during the education process, it's not possible to be effective and successful on labor market. So our principle at this time on organization of educational process is to have distance learning when it's necessary, to organize blended learning and blended format when that can be useful and argumented. And of course, we have this the general aim to organize in-person learning wherever it's safe and it's possible.
Thanks a lot, Irina. Uh, I, I think it's particularly important to remain absolutely encouraging blended learning, and also to consider shelters are potential. Unfortunately, in places of conflict, shelters can also become temporary learning spaces. I have a question for Heidi Rombouts. There is a Safe School Declaration which was endorsed by Belgium and more than 120 other countries, which is a global commitment to protect education from attacks in conflict. And what is the position of Belgium and of the Belgian Directorate for Development Cooperation and Humanitarian Affairs towards protecting and continuing education in crisis situations?
Thank you very much. And I think indeed the Safe Schools Declaration, I think I already mentioned it in my introductory remarks. So it's a very important declaration that we adhere to. And just, and I'm sure that to this audience I don't have to explain the Safe School Declaration, but the whole notion is actually, I would say, going from micro to macro. It is really also about going to schools in a safe space. You know, this whole notion also of the connection to gender-based violence, the violence that girls actually encounter on their way to school, to the more indeed complex settings of emergencies. So we adhere to that. I would, and I know that several of you were there when Belgium launched its new humanitarian strategy, and very grateful to that time also, where UNICEF joined us also importantly in launching it. It was launched by our minister himself with a great commitment indeed for stepping up where we can in terms of humanitarian situations. Undoubtedly, many also in the room know that we are facing also in Belgium budget cuts. It is not, let's say, a phenomenon that is singular to Belgium, but we see it in many countries, and we do undergo the same. Our minister has decided not to cut the budget for humanitarian assistance. At the same time, we do realize we are Belgium. I always say, don't underestimate what a small person can do. As the West African proverb says, if you think you're small or too small to make a difference, you never spend a night with a mosquito in your room. So we can make a difference. And I think it is not always about money. It is also about that political commitment. And our minister really is behind that in terms of protection. Protection is a very important component. We also, as Belgium, try to still adhere, even though these principles are also under stress, to good humanitarian donorship principles, where we provide, for example, UNICEF with core funding. Whereas it is not us going to go to earmark what you have to do in which situation. We do accept the professionality, the expertise of our partners to decide in these situations what is most important, to actually deliver on protection. But protection is very important for us in that. And as I said, UNRWA as a very important partner also in that, where we provide core funding also to UNRWA. So I believe that we have to broaden that conversation also beyond the figures. It is very much also on content. It is very much also on principles. Belgium also adheres strongly to the protection of the rights of the child. We do strongly condemn all attacks on schools, for example. And I think we also have to continue to build a community, to continue having that enabling environment, because even the sharpest expertise cannot deliver if we don't have the enabling overall environment in which that expertise actually needs to be delivered for the fate of every individual child, but as you said, for our common future, for all of us.
Thank you very much. Absolutely critical that we are reminded of the importance of the political commitment, of the advocacy, but also, and for the colleagues who are here and the audience, the core funding for the United Nations agencies is extremely important, as Mevrouw Rambos just said, because this is what allows a UN organization to also focus on crises that are less known, that are less covered, and that are less funded. So extremely important points here. Now, I'd like to move from the humanitarian and the emergency part and more on the stability and development in the longer term. So having made the case here for emergency and protecting and continuing education in crisis, it is important that we also see how education works, of course, in the long-term development. I have a question for you, Elena. From UNICEF global perspective and drawing where, you know, whenever it's useful on your experience, notably in DRC, which investments matter most if we want education systems? So in fragile context, not only to continue functioning, but also to develop and expand in future opportunities. I'm also very conscious of the time, and I'm going to ask our panel colleagues to provide shorter answers if it's possible. But the floor is yours, Elena. Thank you.
Okay, so yeah, thanks for the question. Sorry, I was a bit confused with my notes. Yes, I would say for critical investment stand out from my experience in DRC, but also in other countries, and also from evidence and research that we've heard. So first, I would say the work through and strengthening the national systems from day one. So avoiding creating parallel structures and instead align support behind ministries of education to ensure continuity and sustainability. And this includes keeping schools open, integrating data for children who are displaced, refugees, or children on the move. But also ensuring certification and learning continuity. So that also means strengthening education in emergency into national sector plans and strategies so that authorities at all levels are better prepared and equipped to mitigate, respond, and recover from crises that affect the system functioning. So that also requires stronger coordination amongst partners, humanitarian and development actors, donors and NGOs, to operate within a shared framework aligned behind national education sector plans and use common approaches, tools and data systems. So by strengthening joint planning and delivery, partners can move beyond fragmented interventions towards collective impact, ensuring the national systems are not bypassed but reinforced. Second, I would say investing in teachers as the backbone of resilience and support them as first responders. So in fragile contexts, and we've heard that through many interventions today, teachers are often the only constant force, yet they are frequently unpaid, untrained, or unsupported. So sustained investment in teacher development, adapted training such as training in crisis responsive pedagogy anchored into national systems and financed predictably, in addition to psychosocial support, incentives and well-being, is essential not only to keep system running, but to ensure that children are actually learning even during disruptions. So the third one, I would say, is putting foundational learning at the center of education in emergency investment and expand flexible learning pathways so that learning can continue whatever. And learning should be the foundation for social cohesion. So in many crisis-affected contexts, including DRC that we mentioned, large numbers of children are in schools, but not acquiring basic literacy and numeracy. So when crisis hit, gaps widen further and become much harder to recover. So if we don't protect foundational learning early, we risk permanently limiting children's ability to learn the basics. Equally important is expanding, as I mentioned, learning modalities in crisis to ensure learning continuity. And that means prioritizing structured pedagogy, targeted catch-up program, and teaching at the right level, especially for the most marginalized. So it also means measuring learning, what children are learning, so not just access, but also being able to adapt delivery models to ensure that children are progressing. So it's also crucial to scale non-formal, accelerated, and digital learning options, like we heard examples in Ukraine, but also community-based education, and children and youth can continue learning across disruptions and re-enter formal systems, and so we can reach as many children as possible.
Thanks.
I try to be brief.
Thanks a lot, Elena. And thank you. I think it's particularly important to always keep in mind the long-term consequences that on social cohesion and the role that education plays there. Dr. Assaf, if we talk about the West Bank, including East Jerusalem and the Gaza Strip, what are the perspectives? What are the most important priorities to make the education system in Palestine more resilient and sustainable, according to you?
I believe empowering teachers is the most important. What we face there is a war, a minute war on, for example, on the curriculum in East Jerusalem and the West Bank and Gaza. So if we empower and train the teachers to be able to deliver without even having the textbooks at all, then this is one element that we make sure that the system will continue working despite all the challenges that been put by the occupation. The second one is the strong cooperation with different partners, local, with the society, with the community, with graduates, with universities, but also with the international partners, UNICEF, UNESCO, and the different countries. And we have a very strong platform, and this is maybe for the colleagues in Ukraine. We have something called the cluster, the education cluster, which meets on a monthly basis. And this group of experts and interested people in education discuss all the challenges and plan for the Ministry of Education how to act. That's one, and to implement. And the other platform, which is the sector working group, which is more higher level, presenting different even ambassadors of different countries, and we present to them with the cluster what we plan, what are the challenges, and how we plan to implement, and what we need, what are the gaps that we need. It's not only about financial support, by the way. The financial support is the smallest portion of the needs that a people under crisis face. But more technical support and experts where really we need most of the time, and here where our partners provide us with the experts that we need to maintain the system working forward. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. I mean, empowering teachers and providing beyond financial support, technical support, it's clearly absolutely critical. Irina, I have a question for you. How is Ukraine adapting vocational education and training to change the labor market needs under wartime conditions? And what lesson can you bring to us on this?
That's the most challenging sector, actually, for the organizing of normal educational process in Ukraine, because it's absolutely clear that it's not possible to receive a good welder without practical training. So the biggest challenge was how to organize practical training. And that's why we were forced to revise all our system of organization of vocational education. Firstly, at the early beginning of the full scale aggression, so we had this mode or approach is to remove or relocate for practical training our vet institutions to another one, partners institutions, in the more or less safe region. So that was for first year. After that, of course, we understand that it's not possible to act the same for the future years, because unfortunately, in the case of Ukraine, this war is not a sort of short-term crisis. It's lasting for a long time, and of course, it requires from us the more deep decisions in this field. So we tried also to represent and to renovate our workshops in vocational institutions with equipment based on using of virtual reality or augmented reality. So for us, that's very important to provide vocational institutions with different simulators, which also helps us to use this equipment in shelter, perhaps without additional requirements for the organization. And I think that we also revise an approach for the obtaining of professional qualification. If before the war it was normal to have initial vocational education, and everyone is expected to at least have this study for 2 or 3 years. So for now, Ukraine has changed absolutely this approach, and we adopted the new law on vocational education, because during the crisis we are not just trying to work with urgent issues and matters, but also to work on the strategic development. And we change our focus for short-term training. We introduced micro-credentials, micro-qualifications to the labor market. And now we also have in our focus the huge deficit of workforce in Ukraine at labor market. We are trying to attract as much as possible adult people for the future learning, to obtain this micro qualification or qualification, how it can be. And also that's an additional challenge for us, how to improve our system of career guidance as for at the level of school guidance, and also having in focus adult people. So that's why last year Ministry of Education and Science developed a new concept, a sort of strategy of career counseling, which covers all the sectors of education, starting from secondary education and till the post-diploma education. So that was our general steps on how to improve vocational education. And of course, renovating of equipment couldn't be possible without our support from our partners. And I also want to tell that it also requires from our side a good work on the coordination, and the work of these sectoral groups with the donors and with our partners is really important. And I think that we have really good experience for future share in this.
Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot, Irina. It's It's actually very impressive how crises are actually forcing immediate almost changes to so many aspects of the systems, education systems, including the vocational training. I have a question for you, Heidi. If education delivers not only social benefits, but also strong economic returns, should we be treating it much more explicitly as a strategic investment in stability and growth, and I would say even more and especially in fragile contexts?
Thank you, Jonathan. I think I could be very short in the interest of time, but if you allow me so, I would like maybe to ask the room, who thinks yes to that question? Is investing in education, engaging on education, is it an investment or a cost? Because I think that is the basic question. Who thinks in the room it is? Right, you have your question. You have your answer to your question. I mean, I think it's a bit of a no-brainer. I think, of course, it is an investment, and I think all the studies and the data demonstrate how much it is an investment. So, probably then the more difficult question is how, and if we want to talk in economic terms, which is indeed also, what we're very often encouraged to do, to talk more into economic terms, is how do we upscale the return on this investment? And that, I think, is probably the more interesting question and more challenging at the same time for us. But I was very pleased to hear also the interventions of my predecessors in the panel, because I think there is a large convergence on how we can improve and upscale the return on investment. And we also, and I'll be talking from our perspective as international community, being convinced on that investment, how to act maybe better or change our behavior to make sure that we can upscale the return on investment. I think indeed we need, and there has been, and very often I believe in things that we do, there's some sort of a pendulum. And I think the pendulum has swung back a bit, and you hear it also in conversations on international cooperation and the future of international cooperation. I think we have moved too much again into service delivery, whereas we need to move to systems, and I've heard it everybody say in this panel. Systems need to be strengthened. We have stepped back into the trap very often to produce numbers on how many children did we have in classrooms, how many books did we have distributed, etc., without looking at have we supported the system nationally to deal better with the next crisis. Of course, here in the panel we have Ukraine and Palestine, and I believe I would really want to welcome them for their strong national leadership. It's not always the case, but I think with these strong national leaderships, it is in a way relatively easy for us to invest in that system. We're talking about conflict, very often political here, but we also have situations where emergencies are being produced by natural disaster. I think we have to learn more from our SIDS, small island development states, how they deal with returning crises. And so I think we have to really swing back the pendulum in terms of building systems. That would be my first element on upscaling return on investment. Secondly, I think, again, with maybe a focus on small, and I think we all share the stress of demonstrating that what we do works. And I think it is shared. And we have the short term because the demand is short term. We need to demonstrate, whereas all of us in the room know that the effects are long term. Yeah. And so I think this is a challenge that we collectively need to manage. But also avoid again the trap of the vertical approaches, but really have the system approaches, and again, national. Is my time up? Okay.
No.
Very subtle of you, Jonathan, very subtle.
Absolutely not.
And then maybe I think and again, I'm talking from the perspective of an international community in this field, we have to cut back on the fragmentation. Yes, the international partners are being welcomed. We're working in clusters, which is very good, but still we have to be sharper on who is good at doing what, not trying to be all in the same room, cut down the competition, which is, and I do want to explicitly acknowledge that as well, is additionally complex today because we're being cut back on our funds. But I think if we really want to upscale the return on the investment, then that is also a challenge that we have to take up.
Thank you very much. I mean, working on systems is how we are strategic. System building is the strategic thing to do, and I think it's also important to acknowledge the difference of timing. Education is for the long term, while our world is moving so fast every day. Thank you very much for that. My next question is for you, Lynn. Much of today's policy debate talks about the skills, employability of teenagers, the resilience, how are they potentially fitting economic markets. How do you see things? Isn't it important also to retain a broader human perspective in education, cultural aspects, civic purposes, which are not, I would say, financially directly countable, rather than to be reduced at a purely instrumental role?
So the very short answer is yes. I mean, I definitely agree with that. But let me make 3 points. I think the first one is that it's not an either-or story. I don't think we have to choose either for employability, either for investing in civic education or peace education, whatever term you want to use. It can be done together. And in that sense, I think it's important not to, or perhaps many of you are thinking of peace education, citizenship education, multicultural education as like standalone subjects. And they can be, but they don't have to be, right? They can be, like the objectives can be like transversely integrated across the curriculum, which is actually a thing that Kenya has recently done with their new curriculum. They had a standalone subject before, they took it out, and now it's integrated transversally. Now, I mean, many ways of doing it, but I think the takeaway message there is simply it's not either or. Then anyways, I want to make 2 more critical remarks, or at least invite critical reflection. I think one, which is also definitely supported in research, so that with this focus on employability, and also with resilience, but this is still, I think, 2 different things. I think we should not forget about, the embedding of education within the broader society, and hence the connection between the education that we're providing and the actual opportunities that are available in societies. I think very often it's projected, so it's expected that, for instance, the ICT sector will boom in specific countries. I won't name now any. But then, if that doesn't actually happen, and you have been training your students or pushing them in that direction, it can also create, I think, a kind of a fata morgana. And this has actually happened, not only within the education sector. I think it's also interesting when we think of conflict and education and security, also a response to deal with demobilized fighters is often to provide them with education, and then also very often this is focused on employability, but there are clear examples where these opportunities did not realize at all with the consequences it entails. And then the second reflection is perhaps more anecdotal, or also inspired by, I would even say, frustrations of my own study choices, is that, so to start with that, perhaps, I chose the social sciences, and that was really not considered a smart choice, right? Because who was going to have a job with a political science degree? And yeah, so whatever. But I do think that I think the inherent motivation, the intrinsic motivation of what we want to study still matters, right? And okay, to what extent does such an individual level relate to structural choices that need to be made? That's debatable, but I do nevertheless want to also make an argument for keeping the individual choices of learners along their motivations as an important consideration.
Thank you very much, Lynn. I like to ask binary questions so I can be told it's not necessarily either or, so thanks a lot for that. And I also want to appreciate your efforts for keeping your answers short. We're going to try to move to the Q&A in approximately 15 to 20 minutes. Two more sets of questions for you colleagues. And here it's about the relationship between education and social cohesion. We have mentioned it before, social cohesion and peace. And I have, again, a question for you, Lynn. From your research and others' research, under what conditions can education contribute to social cohesion and peace building? And actually, what are the main risks that you would identify, and other researchers, that shouldn't be overlooked?
Thank you for those nuances. So I will start from the risks and then use the risks as stepping stones for formulating the conditions. So I think the risks that I really encountered, actually really in my own research, are like, first of all, the trauma that teachers have experienced. And so asking them, in particular, when it's really related to their own histories of conflict, but even asking them to deal with student trauma when they also have their own trauma and when they haven't been trained. Obviously, I think this can have very serious consequences. And in this sense, I think it's a very positive trend to see that there's much more emphasis on trauma-informed teaching and learning. However, also within that field, I do think it is still oriented from what the teacher can do for the student, and it's not yet sufficiently looking at also the self-care for the teachers. And the second point would be, or the risk is that, you know, we don't want to put teachers themselves at risk, right? And this is really also something in our own work in Congo that we experienced. So as I mentioned before, we had this training on really teaching about the history of conflict within the Eastern DRC itself. And then we had the M23 re-emergence. So we were really like, okay, what have we done? And if teachers continue to teach about this, this can actually put them at harm. And so I think there is also a need to do a continuous risk assessment for what teachers can and cannot do, and what we should encourage them to do. So that makes like important conditions, basically invest in teacher training and invest in these continuous assessments. And I think what I want to add on that is other conditions relate to the 4R framework. So the framework that I presented before. I think if we really want to genuinely teach for peace or about peace and social cohesion, and those elements that are included in the 4R framework are not there. So if there are no equal opportunities for learning, if groups are discriminated in the way that they are represented in the curriculum, well, what are those messages going to do? And here also research clearly shows that in contexts where they have implemented courses such as human rights and citizenship education, and it's actually not connected to the living world of students, they obviously see the incoherences and inconsistencies, right? And so yeah, I would say another condition would be that there cannot be any contradictions between the content of peace education or education for social cohesion and the realities, or at least not too large, because obviously we need to have a little bit of a playing ground to contribute to changes. But when it's too far apart, I think that is detrimental to and can lead to pessimism rather than optimism.
Thanks a lot, Lynn. Thanks. I'll move quickly to you, Dr. Assaf. In the context of Palestine, which is extremely complicated and extremely challenging, is there a way in which education can contribute to peace building?
Absolutely, it is the most important, and the most contribution to the peacemaking is the education. Without education, those who are extremists by whoever, I mean, they can control those not educated, and they do whatever they want to do in the society and with their neighbors or whoever. So if you want to build peace, if you want to have human rights, if you want to talk about climate changes, if you want to do any problem that we face currently, really you can solve it with education. Now, there are sometimes contradiction between what Linz just said. Is it really possible that we talk about human rights while there's no implementation on the ground? I believe yes. And I'll say what happened with me personally, and allow me to take this. My son is 13 years old. One main subject in the curriculum is the human rights. When I started talking about it, he said, stop. I mean, what are you talking about? There's no human rights. I cannot express myself. If I want to talk about my identity, I cannot do it. His movement, everything is not there. But then the teacher, I consider myself a teacher, but also teachers, this in particular, this example, have been faced with the whole teachers in Palestine, in particular in Gaza, and we have my colleagues here. Is there human rights? And there were a question. All the countries, the Western countries, talk about human rights, respecting the human rights, but where is our human rights when Israel is committing genocide and nobody is questioning them and holding them accountable? No, there is a human rights. Now, if we respect that human rights, we as Palestinians, you, the children of Palestine, will you fight for those human rights, not only for yourself, but for the others? Now, we have human rights violation in Ukraine. It's far from Palestine, but should I raise it? Yes, it's my duty as a human to raise it. So, all good means of a human coexistence. I mean, I have to explain to my children that there are other people than Muslims in the country. You know, Palestine, we have Christians, we have Jewish, Palestinian Jewish, not Israeli Jewish. So we have to tell them that those are Palestinians, but also those who come to visit us in Palestine. I have very good friends from Belgium who come to my house. She's a lady, and she start competing with my wife. I'm sorry, talking about something which happens on the cooking, which food is much better, Palestinian or Belgian. Now, my children never experienced to meet with someone from overseas. Remember, Palestine is closed. Whoever comes from countries to support, to be in diplomat delegation or UNICEF, UNESCO, and those institutions. But our universities, we were discussing this morning, is old schools. I mean, we don't have foreign students. So our children are not exposed to meet with others and to understand the other cultures. So it's very important to educate them about this, so that when they meet with someone else, can respect that they are different, but we are human and we can live together. We can build the society, I don't mean the society in Palestine, but the human society in general, in a positive way, not just to think that we are different and we have those type of differences and we cannot coexist. Coexistence, and let me talk about politics now a little bit. When Palestine, the PLO, and Israel signed the agreement, 1993, there were a full range of committees, different lines in education, curriculum, trade, currency, all aspects of life. We have talked about it. So it's just to reach an agreement how to coexist and how we can really have a better life. Now, politics have destroyed all of that. Fine. Will we have it in the future? Maybe. We cannot say no. We wish, we Palestinians, we want to have a peace with everyone, but respecting our rights. So we have to teach our children that it is possible, not only with Israel, but with all other nations, that we can live together and we can build together a good economy, a good society, a good institutions, etc., etc. So the most important, yes, is education. The first priority, if humanities and if politicians will be wise one day, to focus on education, because it's the mean of coexistence, is the mean of building a good nations. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Asta. We all really want to give, I see many questions, so I really want to give the floor to Heidi for just 2 minutes about the aspect of coordination and the nexus between humanitarian and development. So I have just one question for you. At a time when both domestic and aid budgets are under growing pressure, to say the least, how can donors and policymakers sustain credible commitment to education?
The $1 billion question for 2 minutes.
You can have 3.
Yeah, I think it is good also as a community all being convinced, that this is an investment and an investment worth making, to be honest, in terms of budgets. As I said, I already announced, and it's not a new announcement, we're implementing it already. And my fear is that the reality is going to be that there will not be budget increases in the short run. And it's better to face it as well. So I think we have to think, for me, about that upscaling of the return on investment. Yes, we are working on, how and where else in creative ways can we find new budgets. And I'm sure that many of us and you in the room, we're sitting in many conferences and we hear words like innovative financing. Innovative financing is the word that I've heard most in recent conferences. But let's be honest about money. It's not that complicated. There's not 25,000 ways of having access to money. There are actually relatively few ways, and they, yes, we can explore. I think there's some interesting explorations in the humanitarian context with insurances, etc. So yes, we can definitely expand, but that's never going to fill the huge gap that is there, because it's not just the budgets that are being cut and lowered. It is also the amounts of crises and the time that they take and I forget the word now, the protracted crises that we have. And so it's both ways. We need more and the availability is less. And so I think we have to be way more fundamental about that return on investment and upscaling that. And that is, I think, work we have to do together. And I think also we have to invest also in international communities more on lowering these crises. We have to get better at it. We're way worse than a few decades ago. And that, I think, is also an important investment that the international community has to make. The minister in Belgium has made working on stability a core field of priority. It is a global public good to invest in stability. And that will also contribute, hopefully one day, to lower the needs. So I think we have to work on all the ends in the spectrum.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Heidi. Global public good. I think that these are 3 words we can keep in the back of our heads also in the future conversations. I would like to open the floor for any question for our panelists. I have 2-3 questions online. Please, sir, do you have a microphone? Or voila.
Thank you. I'm Jacques from Biki. We are a private company. We basically reduce the cost of deployment of education. And I'm frustrated, like you, that every time I go to a humanitarian conference and so on, there's 5 panels about innovative finance. I'm slightly exaggerating, but okay. And 0 about how to make more with less. How can we change that? That in fact in the programs of the various conferences, there is also talk about how can we reduce cost intelligently. I live in Geneva. The intelligent cost reductions we've seen is firing a bunch of people, which is very classic. Hopefully those who remain will be more effective, but often that's not the case. Well, that's my question. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We can take several questions. Yes, please, if you don't mind, when you ask your question, if you have a preferred panel member to answer it, please mention it. Please, sir.
Hello. Yeah, first of all, I would like to thank the organizers of this event or this conference. I am a PhD holder. I got my PhD from the VUB in Brussels 15 years ago. And I was working in Gaza, in the University of Gaza, Gaza, as an IT lecturer. And excuse me, before asking my question, I would only mention something. It's for me, this conference is very important, and the most good thing that most of the keynotes and the people talking here is about the hope. And the hope maybe is the most important thing that we need in to rebuild the educational system in Gaza. I will use the word hope to ask you, especially the keynotes, what do you think are the main list of actions that would be done or doing in order to translate or interpret the hope, the word hope, to a list of actions, especially regarding the situation of Gaza and the educational system in Gaza. We are talking about 97% of the schools and university and educational institutions were destroyed, totally destroyed. We are talking about more than 20,000 students were killed. We are talking about more than 1,000 academic staff were also killed. So for me, it's important maybe to mention that we are talking about someone who was shot in heart. The educational system in Gaza was shot in heart, and people, they were talking about cosmetics or plastic chirurgy. I think what Gaza needs, or what the educational system in Gaza needs, is actually a list of actions, effective actions, maybe starting by stop attacking the educational system in Gaza, and later trying to rebuild the educational system.
Thank you very much. I am really sorry. I have to limit to 2 questions, unfortunately, but we will be able to discuss further. So I have those 2 questions from the room for you. First of all, I would summarize it, sir, if you're fine, about how do we do more with less? And the second question is very much about what are the concrete actions to re-establish hopes, especially in contexts like Gaza. I would suggest perhaps the second question for you, Dr. Assaf, but whomever wants to take the first question, please feel free.
I would maybe also give some insights of what we can do with less, and we need more to do. Look, cooperation is very important, and benefiting from other context experience. We have benefited from something called learning passport that UNICEF have implemented in different countries, and we have took it in Palestine, in particular for Gaza, because it's an offline platform. We have recorded all the lessons for different subjects, and it's offline, so they don't need internet. So it's one example, and we have many. Ukraine, in terms of TVET, we have started using virtual labs for the TVET education, which is very important. We did not build those labs virtual. We have taken them from friends, partners who've been working on that, and they offer that for Palestinian students, in particular for medical students and engineers. it's very important if we have a platform, UNICEF, UNESCO, United Nations, that everybody put his experience and what they have developed. We have developed so many flexible systems that convert education on a daily basis in the West Bank, in a small village where the Israelis comes in without minutes. Each and every student, parents, and teacher will get a message to say that today is not face-to-face, it's online education. So we have many experiences that we can share and we can learn from others, and this is very important that we can have something open to discuss all the achievements from different countries, from institutions, and how we can share all of that. Now for Ghazi, Doctor, we have a responsive plan we developed with all the partners. The political side, unfortunately, is not taking action against Israel, is not holding the Israeli government accountable. Now they have Mr. Trump, who's been the peacemaker of the world, announced the ceasefire more than 6 months ago, or 4 months, whatsoever. Since then, more than 700 people have been killed. They continue with arresting, they continue with the destruction, and nobody is looking and saying, stop, that's enough. What we can do with the education, yes, we have to invest a lot. And I'll give you one number. In Gaza, the government has, before the war, 309 school buildings. Of that, 295 has been destroyed. You can imagine. However, Gazan people were creative. They used their spaces, tents. Any room is not being used is now currently used. We have 400 at our system. You know, in Gaza, we have two systems, our system and UNRWA. Normally, we are 50-50. We have the students number 50-50. Now we have in our system, before I came, I spoke with our people there, 460,000 students from 700. UNRWA has 190,000. So we almost, there are some is not there, some of the children. But we don't have control over all Gaza. You know, the yellow line, which we cannot operate in it. And UNRWA is under threat and under attack by the Israelis. So far, the Gazan people, and with the partnership of the different, UNICEF, UNESCO, and all other partners, countries like Belgium, Germany, Ireland, Finland, all of those people, those countries, support the institutions, international institutions, to maintain the minimum requirements of education, which we believe we managed to do it during the war, and our teachers in the West Bank who do lectures online to the students in Gaza, which we call it virtual schools, we complement and we keep the students alive. We keep the hope for them, and we can continue rebuilding. We have the full scale of plan, which we call it responsive plan, to how to restart again and how to build, but we need stability. We need the wise politicians to be more wiser and take decisions that enough is enough. Enough is what's happening in Ukraine. Enough is what's happening in Africa. So many countries in Africa are, we don't really sometimes mention them. Enough is what's happening in Gaza and different places of the world. This is our parts. And allow me to my even closing remarks, because this is our duty. Your duty, the youth, is to carry on this message and to force your political leadership to take action to stop the war on Ukraine, to stop the war on Palestine, to stop the violation, the support of the groups in Africa who disrupt the education, and they use the youth for their wars. So this is a message to politicians, but it's a message to all of you that each one of us have duty toward the education system, not only in his own country, but in other parts of the world.
Thank you very much, Dr. Assa, for those powerful words. I want to, Heidi Rambos, you're going to hate me. I'd like you to answer that very important question, but also extremely complex questions in 2 minutes, maybe 2.5 minutes.
I think the Vice Minister gave some very good examples, and maybe just to also to be very short and not to push the question away, because I think, yes, we have to, it's good to continue the advocacy that we need budget, and because public money in education will always remain necessary. But I would like to invite you maybe to talk about how can we do better with less rather than more with less. I do feel there is something about we will do more with less as if we have never, as if before we didn't do enough with what we had, which I think would not be fair. But maybe there's things we can do better with less. And I've been in many panels where I've also argued sometimes we will have to start being very honest to say that we will have to do less with less. Not overpromise, because then we overstretch and we tend to suggest to certain politicians that, okay, you still cut budgets, but we can still do and deliver the same. I think that that would be setting ourselves up for failure. We will have to do better with less, and I think the examples that you gave were very valuable in that regard. But in the end, also some of it, why don't we have these people or these panels on the agenda? I believe it's sometimes a matter of courage and a challenge of collective action. Because these examples that I gave on how to upscale our return on investment are about ourselves, looking inwards, about, okay, we cede the field to another actor here. We don't have to be all of us in the same room. And this asks also for courage internally. So and I think this is upon all of us to have that conversation.
Thank you very much. Dear guests, I would like to give a big round of applause to our panelists. Thank you very much for your insights and important reflections. So thank you. We're going to wrap up now, and I just want to thank you for the participation and the attendance here. We're going to have a lunch break now. We will resume at 1:30. So there will be 4 labs, one which will take place in this room, the Soconi room, and the other one which will take place in the Ubuntu room, which just on your right when you exit this room, where we will have the different learning labs. And normally the program should be shown, if you have it, just for everyone to get the different learning labs we have. Education Under Fire, that will be Soconi here at 1:30. At the same time will be the Advancing Foundational Learning and Build Resilience and Stability in the Ubuntu room. And then at 3 p.m. we will have the l'inclusion avant tout, repenser l'éducation, what a rhythm, huh? And so, in the Ubuntu we will have how to reinforce fundamental learning for resilience. So these labs will take place. What about we take just a quick picture before it goes away again? Well, here we go. We have it now. So bon appétit, and let's reconvene at 1:30 for the labs, which I am sure are going to be as interesting as the panel discussion we had this morning. Thank you very much.